And the next part we're going to talk about is the extremes of intelligence. If intelligence is such a visible kind of controlling factor, we imagine we could see kind of behavioral differences in people who have really high levels of intelligence and also really low levels of intelligence. So let's start at the lower end, which we call those who have intellectual disabilities. So as measured on the IQ score, for those who have scored below a certain point, they're kind of labeled with the term mental retardation. Right, let me look at the list here. This is kind of how it breaks down from the different scores. If you score from 50 to 70, you have about mild mental retardation. So it says here that you may learn academic skills up to 6th grade level. Adults may, with assistance, achieve self-supporting social and vocational skills. When you're at 35 to 50, you have moderate mental retardation. It says, may progress to 2nd grade level academically. Adults may contribute to their own support by laboring in sheltered workshops. Finally, for those who are severe, which is 20 to 35 IQ scores, may learn to talk and to perform simple tasks under close supervision, but are generally unable to profit from vocational training. So these people can't even work on their own. Finally, on the bottom level is the profound, anything below 25, means you require constant aid and supervision. So you can see, depending on your intelligence score, you have different levels of functioning. You could maybe achieve like high school level of education and have vocational training to self-support. If you're lower down, you have kind of more social supervision for someone who have assisted living or someone taking care of you, like that. There might be a biological propensity for intellectual disability. For example, there's the issue of Down syndrome, which is a genetic illness that you could get. And basically the cause of Down syndrome is having an extra 21st pair of chromosomes. So this is kind of a genetic anomaly, and you may have known people with Down syndrome yourself or seen them in movies, and they kind of have a physical characteristic that go along with it, like basically a thicker neck. And this is actually a trait that you can measure while the child is still in the womb. There's certain genetic trait tests you could see that they have Down syndrome. Now, I want to talk about the mainstreaming of mental retardation, because there's a time when, early on, when people with mental retardation are kind of whisked away and put in separate areas of society. They get their own mental homes, they're kind of put away in sight, and they're actually kind of quartered and secluded and not able to participate in being included in the mainstream society. That line of thought has kind of changed in the last 30 to 40 years, in that we understand now that those people with constant supervision and care can actually become a contributing member of society, that they could actually become a mainstream person and kind of return back with certain level of help and kind of supervision. So in this case, we have seen that instead of excluding them and omitting them from society, they become more inclusive and more mainstreamed. Now let's look at the other high extreme, when you have really high levels of IQ. One of the earliest work is in Terman's study of the gifted. So basically, Terman worked in California and identified thousands of gifted children. These are children with higher than average IQ scores, and kind of followed them through time. They were very young at the time, and now they've gotten much older, and they were seeing whether there's any behavioral differences between those who have a high IQ. And they found that yes, there's actually a lot of related associated kind of benefits. For example, those who have high IQ are more likely to complete more schooling. They got higher degrees and went to graduate school. They're more likely to get advanced professional work. For example, they're more likely to be doctors, lawyers, scientists, professors. So the kind of were able to be very self-actualizing. Unfortunately, they didn't have any Nobel Prize winners in that group yet, so we'll see how that is done. Okay, but in order to talk about that, one issue that comes up in terms of using intelligence to track someone's progress is that of the self-fulfilling prophecy. And basically this is the finding that when you kind of tell people that a certain group of people are gifted, that people will act and change their behavior on them such as to elicit that kind of gifted behavior. I'll show you two studies that looked at the self-fulfilling prophecy, that there is a prophecy, once you think something's going to forecast it to happen, then we change our behavior to bring up those results. So one of the earlier studies with rats, they had students take rats home and kind of test them in mazes. So to begin with, the experiment in this class, a teacher, professor, they got a bunch of white rats, they're all the same, and then randomly divided them into two groups. For one group, they gave them to students, told them these are gifted rats. These are rats that are very quick at learning mazes. And for another group, the same rats were given to another group and told that these are kind of slower rats, and it takes them longer to learn mazes. And so these students, these participants in this case, went home and then tested these rats on their own, timed them in mazes, and surprisingly enough, well, unsurprisingly enough, they figured out that the students noticed the same differences that they were actually told to expect. So those who were expecting to get fast rats recorded much faster times when the mice ran the maze. For the other group that were told to expect slower rats, they found that the rats actually ran slower in that time. But however, the thing is the rats are exactly basically the same, randomly divided into these two groups. So the only thing that was different is really the expectations of the people running the maze, right? So they might have kind of unknowingly changed their behaviors, they might have encouraged the rat to run faster if you think the rat is going to run faster. And for those who are slower, they have less expectations. And so we'd see that the running speed of those rats are actually slower. Right? And you think, well, Curtis, is just with rats. How about in humans? Would that kind of outcome exist? And they've actually done one study, Rosenbaum and Rosenbaum did one study where they went to a kindergarten school, and they kind of randomly divided the class in half, and they kind of pretended to run intelligence tests on these young students, right? So they, and then later told the teachers that certain students are what they call smart bloomers, that they're going to learn things much faster and be much smarter than other peers. For some teachers, they were told that certain students were late bloomers. These are students who are going to take longer to learn something. And so they came back at the end of the semester. Again, these students are just randomly chosen to be either labeled fast bloomers or late bloomers. And they came out at the end of the semester, and they found that, like they suspected, self-fulfilling prophecy has actually done their work. The teachers who were expecting students to do much better, those students actually did much better compared to students who weren't. And so in explaining what exactly was going on, we could see kind of two different things. Again, the students were kept in the dark about whether their own development. It's really only the people that operate and work with the students that came up with these different kind of changes. So they think that there's something about the action of the teacher that led to the differences in the academic performance of these children. And they could kind of taken in different forms. For example, those who were labeled fast bloomers were expected to do more, and they were given more difficult work problems, and they were taught more in their lessons, right? Secondly, they were encouraged more. And thirdly, they were kind of rated more leniently. Maybe when you assess a child, maybe when you grade their tests or read their essays, if you expect the child to be really smart, then you kind of see smarter things that come out of that essay. Let's look at the flip side of that. If you're labeled as a late bloomer, not as smart, the teacher might be more lenient when you get something wrong. They might not be able to push you so hard. And when they grade your reports and your exercises, they expect you to get a lot of mistakes. And that's the kind of thing that changes your actual grading of the performance, right? So again, the person's expectation of how you will do will actually change your behavior, both in terms of eliciting that behavior and also processing that behavior, so the grading, for example. So self-fulfilling prophecy might work here because those who have high intelligence have people expect them to do better, and they treat them in such a way it'll elicit that result. Flip side of the coin, if someone says that you're not very smart, you have a low IQ, then they might treat you in a way that's not very smart, they treat you like an idiot, and that you might be more likely to turn out to become someone who's not as fulfilled because of that kind of treatment. And so that has implications on this idea of student placement, that in many schools in the States and in Asia, they put the smart students in one class and maybe some remedial students in another class. And that has an effect on the self-fulfilling prophecy, not just on the students' own labeling, they have a self-esteem kind of issue, but also because the teachers and their parents and everyone around them starts to treat them a different way to elicit those results.